So as you can see then, we're comfortably back on the command line of the CentOS 7 machine, and if we run ls block we can see that we've got those 4 extra disks we were talking about: SDB, SDC, SDD and SDE. For the moment we're going to be concentrating on the first 2 of those disks, SDB and SDC, for our standard Linux RAID. This requires us to create partitions on those devices. Now, of course, we can use parted or we can use fdisk to create those partition tables. But because they're the same geometry, I can copy the partition table across. So let's take a look then of partitioning up SDB. Now, pretty much we can use the defaults here. So as I go through, new primary partition, partition number 1, starting at the beginning of the disk and running through then to the end of the disk. But we do need to choose T to change the partition type, and we want to set the partition type to DA, the non-file system data. This is because this is a later Linux system and we're using the init RAM FS. If you're using an earlier system, you would use then the FD type. If we want to, we can use L to, or go back to type and then use L to list our partition codes. Of course, we've got a bucket load of partition types here, but we're really interested in the right-hand column, and then we've got DA and FD. So DA is the non-file system data, and this is recommended where we're using the init RAM FS on later Linux kernels. On the earlier Linux kernel, we can see then that we've got the Linux RAID Auto type of FD. So we want to use DA. It's not recommended on the later system to use partition type FD. So we can then just write our DA and write our changes through to the partition table using the W option. Now that we have our partition on SDB and we have got the same geometry disks, we're able to use sfdisk. And with sfdisk, we just demonstrate the option to begin with. If we use option -D, and then for our device dev SDB, we dump the partition table. But we can send it to our standard input of sfdisk through the pipe command, and we can force then the partition table to be written to /dev/SDC. So it just becomes a simple mechanism to automate the partition creation. Of course, at this stage it's always a great idea to double check the disk we're reading from and the disk that we're writing from, because this is destructive, and with the -force option set, it's not going to prompt me to accept the changes. But we see now that information has been written, and then as I look at ls block, we can see now correctly we've got those partitions SDB1, which we've copied through to SDC1. So we've got the partitions in place that we need, and as we're using the later kernel, we're using the DA partition type rather than FD. Once we've got this all set up, we can then go through and start creating our devices, our RAID devices, so that we can create file systems on them. So let's jump back now into the slides to take a look at that process.